afternoon, everyone. For those, maybe 5 of you that don't know me, my name is Puja. And next year will mark the 30th year that I've been working in business aviation. Yeah, I know. I started when I was 5. No, I started as an aerodynamics engineer at Pratt & Whitney, Canada. And I worked in various roles in product development, design, sales, but most of my career has been in aviation operations. And I can probably count on one hand in the last 20 years how many clients asked me what were the emissions of my flight. Maybe less than one hand, if I'm honest. But things started to shift about 5 years ago when compliance schemes started to really come into play. So CORSIA and EU ETS, which was well established, but they were all rolling out at the same time in terms of enforcement. And operators started to panic, and a lot of action on the operator side. And at the same time, we were experiencing some, especially in Europe, eco-terrorism, if you recall. That's when it started. And I also noticed at that time that there was a shift in branding for the luxury brand sector. So a lot of luxury brands were starting to brand themselves as sustainable. So sort of I put all of these things together, and in 2021, my business partner and I launched what's called Azzera. And we had the mission of catalyzing the aviation sector to be more sustainable, but really to react to this market condition that had occurred, and do it without effort. You know, the belief was that we should not listen to the eco-terrorists and the critics and stop flying or reduce flying, and in fact, that's really not realistic at all, and we know that. We're in this sector. We believe in flying, and we believe in more aircraft. And that's the way the market is actually going. So the answer is to find a solution or solutions, a toolkit, to keep the aircraft, the jet flying, and the planet thriving, so that they thrive together, right? So let's talk a little bit about aviation in the context of world emissions. I think many people know this. The aviation sector in general has about 3% of the world emissions. It generates about 3%, which is not a big number in the grand scheme of things, but if left unchecked, it's expected to triple by 2050. So then it becomes more of a serious issue. So ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, recognized this back in early 2000s, and they started to launch what is now the net zero strategy by 2050, which was ratified several times, including 2025. And this strategy involves 4 pillars. It involves 4 sort of actions that the aviation sector can do in order to achieve net zero by 2050. And the roadmap is outlined by these 4 pillars. The heavy lifter, as we all know, is sustainable aviation fuel. So by 2050, the estimation is that 65% of the emissions generated by the aviation market would be covered by SAF. And then there's also technical improvements, which are about 13%. So that's new propulsion systems, hydrogen, electric propulsion. 3% are operational improvements. So this is really about flying at a lower long-range cruise level, optimizing your taxi, takeoff, idle times to improve the fuel burn of the aircraft. And the final piece is carbon credits or carbon offsets at 19%. So these are the levers that ICAO has rolled out. Let's see how aviation is doing. And in particular, before I continue, I want to thank Al and Luisa and the whole team for inviting me to talk about this topic. I know it's not always fun, but CJI is committed to this topic, and I appreciate that very much. And one of the questions that the team asked me to address is, how does commercial and business compare? So how do we compare when we talk about the business aviation sector versus commercial? And as I mentioned, the aviation sector as a whole is 3%. Commercial is 2.5% of world emissions. Business aviation is less than 0.05, okay? So we are a small piece of the big picture. And what's interesting about all of this is that the regulation that I talk about, ICAO, EU ETS, et cetera, covers 80% of commercial aviation activity. Whereas in business aviation, only 10% of our activity is covered by regulation. What does that mean? That means that we're actually 90% of what we do is not covered by by regulation. Yes, it's good for operators. Yes, it's good for cost, but it leaves us exposed to market criticism, to market oversight, to potential regulation that we don't know about yet, right? And if we dig a little bit deeper, in terms of the levers that I had outlined earlier, the two levers that are accessible today to most of us are SAF and carbon credits. Those two levers, if we talk about SAF, commercial aviation is running at about 0.3% of SAF usage. So of all of the fuel that they purchase in a year, it's 0.3% is SAF. And business aviation is again running at a very low number, at less than 0.05% of its fuel requirements. Why is that? Well, we know, for example, that in general, the numbers are low. And why is that? That's because of cost and availability of SAF. In business aviation, it's even more of a challenge because it's not prioritized. I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's also that business aviation traffic is not in the airports that are being focused on for SAF deployment, right? When it comes to carbon credits, about 30 to 40 airlines have programs where they're offsetting their emissions, and the business aviation sector is only about 10 to 15% are offering some sort of offset for their emissions to their clients. This will change because CORSIA, which is the ICAO compliance scheme, requires carbon credits as a compliance mechanism. Next year, CORSIA will start requiring operators all over the world, including in Asia, who operate internationally to offset emissions over a certain level. So this is all, it's quite complex. You have to be over a certain threshold. There's a factor that you have to use, and then you'll calculate how many emissions you need to buy, and you would have to buy those offsets, CORSIA eligible offsets. That's for operators, obviously. Just a little bit more about business aviation and the topic of sustainability. I talked about this earlier. You know, luxury branding, I know there's a couple of topics earlier today, but luxury branding in general has really embraced sustainability as not just an add-on, but it's a part of the offering, right? It's part of this whole customer experience. Jetcraft released a study a few years ago that 85% of the new aircraft buyers are under 45. That generation of buyers has had sustainability as part of the conversation since they were born. They believe in it, they understand it, they accept it, they expect it, right? So to add to that, if we take some examples like Patek Philippe and Louis Vuitton and Bentley, Patek Philippe has committed to only sustainable sourcing of all of their products. Louis Vuitton has committed billions to it's a program called 360 Life, where they've measured the scope 1, 2, 3 of their emissions. I know some operators here, some people here know what that's about. And they have a roadmap to reduce their emissions to zero. And they've invested billions in this. And then Bentley is also, they have a UK headquarters that is fully carbon neutral, and they're rejigging all of their power requirements to renewable electricity. And this is stuff that they don't do, hidden. They promote it. It's part of the lifestyle. It's part of the brand. And our clients are now, it's sort of normalized that this is part of the service that is offered in a luxury brand. So back to SAF for a second. Is SAF demand slipping? I was also asked this question, and the answer is, there is perception with the geopolitical environment that we live in today that the demand for SAF is slipping, but the reality is it's not. The roadblock remains availability and price. So we have a bottleneck in that, particularly if we look at Asia, you see that there's a couple of developers of SAF that have readily available SAF today. Neste, Cosmo Oil in Japan, that's about it. There are agreements in place for other producers, but they don't have commercially available SAF today. And that is a roadblock for operators that are wanting to buy SAF. It does not make sense to buy SAF here and bring it in from somewhere else, right? So that is a big roadblock. And of course, price, SAF is 3 to 5 times the cost of Jet A right now. So what's going to change this dynamic is a demand signal. And the best way to do that is through a book and claim system. So a book and claim system is a system that allows an operator that doesn't have physical access to SAF to buy the environmental benefit, so pay the premium for SAF above Jet A, but somebody else will burn it who has access to SAF but not pay for it. So that has to be tracked in a system that is auditable and traceable with what's called a chain of custody, so that it can be recognized by compliance markets, by, if you're going to claim the benefit of SAF, you need to actually have that chain of custody. So that is what a book and claim system is about in a brief, and ICAO is working on, the key here is to have clear centralized guidance, and I think ICAO is rolling that out pretty soon. The other challenge we have in business aviation, I mentioned it earlier, is that we're not covered by the regulation that commercial aviation is covered by. And last year and this year, the EU rolled out a new legislation called the Refuel EU. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but don't really understand what it is. It's not so straightforward because they've been sort of rolling it out in pieces. But it is actually in force since January of this year. And what it means in short is that airports, union airports in Europe, need to have a 2% average SAF blend throughout the year, and they need to demonstrate that. They need to demonstrate that they've been fueling at 2% for that throughout the year to the authorities, the EU authorities. At the same token, which is not so well known, is that operators that are fueling at those union airports, so even business jet operators in Asia, if you're flying into a union airport in the EU, you will need to report your fuel uptake in those airports. So what they're watching for is the amount of tankering, right? They want to see that the uptake in those 2% airports is at a certain level. And if you don't demonstrate that uptake, you will be fined. So those things have already been implemented. They're evolving in terms of how things get reported, but as an operator, it's quite a burden. In business aviation, this legislation is not optimum because we fly to different types of airports, and even in commercial airports, we don't have agreements in place necessarily, where the airlines do. They have the volume, they can negotiate pricing and sign agreements. So the business aviation operators end up paying a premium for the SAF blend, even if they don't need it. So this is a bit of a disadvantage we have in this, which will be caught up, I think, in future legislation. But if we talk about Asia, it's clear there's a bit of an appetite gap when it comes to the Asian market. We know that there are some airlines, like Cathay Pacific has committed to 10% SAF by 2030, and Singapore Airlines has also signed a lot of SAF mandates, agreements, and there's a few other operators. But it's not a huge demand when compared to the rest of the world. And we also know that there's very limited, as we talked about, there's limited supply in Asia. And in general, public perception is not so visible in terms of demand for these kinds of activities. And the regions don't have clear mandates in place. So there are some targets in place. Japan has a 10% SAF target by 2030, and I think Singapore has a 1% SAF, well, 3 to 5% SAF target by 2030. But these are targets, they're not mandates. So targets, as we know, don't necessarily achieve results. I don't want to paint a very gloom and doom picture for business aviation in Asia and in general, but business aviation does have the opportunity now to catch up. And in theory and in general, we know from facts, like many of us have been in the business aviation sector for many years, we know that business aviation has always led through innovation. And if you think about things like cabin connectivity, or improved aerodynamics through winglets or cockpit design, it's always come from business aviation. Business aviation is the first mover, and then it transfers to commercial aviation. And I think there's an opportunity here under no legislation, which we have less of in business aviation, with a market that can afford innovation, that we can do some new things in business aviation and lead the way, even in Asia. And the demand, as we said, is starting to grow for these types of initiatives, like using SAF, carbon credits, technology improvements, etc. So can BizDrive drive sustainability? Here are 3 examples where we can. If you are an operator of aircraft, you can bundle sustainability into the client experience. So you can, for example, if you have a private jet owner, you can offer in the monthly invoice every month, you can offer to calculate the emissions and the cost to go carbon neutral in a way that is very customized to the owner. If you're, similarly, if you're a broker and you're selling flight hours or a charter flight, you can standardize that with every charter quote, there's a price, there's a time of the flight, and there's the emissions of the flight. This now becomes normalized, right? Sustainability is part of the conversation, it's not an extra. And there's always an option to make that flight carbon neutral. And then the last thing, which is the most important thing for any business in the aviation sector, you can centralize your emissions in a way that you can manage everything. So you can use online platforms to calculate emissions, whether it's the flights of your fleet or your whole business. And we've worked with businesses that are not just operators, but FBOs, jet transactions, MROs, and charter brokers. So all of those things can be managed online, where you have a centralized source of measuring your emissions, but then also accessing tools to mitigate those emissions. And report, obviously. So that leads me to a little quick pitch about Azzera and what we do. Sorry, Al. So we were designed, as I said, to catalyze the aviation sector. We use 3 things. We use digital tools, which is automated solutions. We have a team of experts that have expertise in sustainability and aviation. And we also offer a lot of guidance and thought leadership and a lot of educational tools. So if you need to, as a business, educate yourself before you make any changes, we have a lot of that material online. And how we focus is in 4 different areas. Emissions compliance management, that's on a digital platform. So operators looking to file those compliance reports, it's all automated with our platform. Everything is automated. There is no extra work, including all of the dashboards, the reports, everything. We have access to sustainable aviation fuel, and we have, if you are buying sustainable aviation fuel as an operator, you can also track your fuel usage. You're not going to buy a barrel of SAF and put it in one aircraft, right? So you need to track that. And then we also have carbon accounting. So as a business, you want to know just your flight emissions? Do you want to know your business emissions, what's called scope 1, 2, and 3? You can do that as well and create a strategy for reducing your emissions over time. And then finally, we have access to high-quality carbon credits. We can provide you with high-quality carbon credits, which becomes really important with CORSIA in the next phase. Our platform, it's a digital platform called Celeste. And this, I can talk to anyone about this afterwards. It's more targeted towards operators and charter brokers, but it automates, as I said, the entire after you fly experience in terms of emissions management. From filing compliance reports, measuring your emissions, accessing SAF and carbon credits, all of that can be done online. This is just an example of how a broker can calculate their emissions. So you can calculate your emissions through your airport pairs, your number of hours, your fuel burn, or you may already know your emissions and you can put that into Celeste. And then we would generate a profile for you. Here we've used an example just so you understand conceptually the cost involved in this kind of activity for a charter broker or for a client. We've used this Global 6000 as an example. And here it's an Asian client, so we chose to do a portfolio that has 5% SAF and the rest carbon credits. And the result is, this is all based in, primarily we tried to focus with an Asia focus. So the cost for this flight to be carbon neutral on the 6000 is $25 per hour, US. Now, with my background in aviation and operations, I understand that charter activity is very competitive, but $25 per hour on a global is very manageable. And you would be fully carbon neutral. Okay. So just to wrap up, I do believe that the Asia market has the potential to be a first mover market. I've outlined the challenges, I've outlined the fact that there is a gap, but there is also an opportunity. And I think that, we understand the market is shifting, the expectations of the market are different. The clients that are in Asia are flying to Europe and the rest of the world, and they're seeing the differences. They're seeing the availability of SAF, they're seeing different things. And if they come back to Asia and they see those things here, they might be more interested. They might be more inclined to say this is more of a forward-looking operation. The solutions exist. So SAF, carbon credits, these online digital platforms, they exist today. They're turnkey solutions. And I think if you think about the cost of compliance, it's really important that you start now. You start thinking about your emissions as an operator or even as a business, because you need to know your emissions because there will be penalties if you don't at some point, and that's coming. For an operator now. So if you're in Asia, we work with a couple of Asian operators. Flying into Europe, they're already at the level, they don't know halfway through the year, but you would know if you used an online platform, whether you've crossed the threshold and you actually need to buy allowances. So that's really important because if you don't, and at the end of the year, you come to the end of the year and you don't file, you could have pretty significant penalties. Refuel EU is quite stringent. So to conclude, this was supposed to say business aviation is a good business strategy, and it is. I think that it is, and I would strongly recommend that you think about that and also understand, in my opinion, that I believe that the jet and the planet not only should thrive together, I think they can thrive together. So hopefully I've convinced you. Thank you. Questions?
I've got one quick question.
Sure.
Sorry. One quick. You've got one quick question from Mark Butler. What's the dollar percentage difference between commercial and business aviation for SAF? So I think he's wondering, what do you pay more? Business aviation pay more? And is it not better for aviation in general to have a long-term use test with business aviation?
A long-term use test, what does that mean?
Just in terms of feedback on SAF.
Yeah.
Like
I can hear
Maybe,
you.
does that work? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Switch it on.
Only someone, a bad workman blames the tool.
Yeah. I have to admit, I'm really not a believer in SAF. I don't think it will ever, certainly in my working lifetime, get to the point where it's $1 equivalent to regular jet
Yeah.
fuel. And no matter how much I love the concept of SAF, at the end of the day, the principals out there that are paying the bills to operate the aircraft and to charter the aircraft, they don't care. It's a horrible thing to say, but the truth of the matter is, if you go to a customer and say, it's $220,000 for this charter with jet fuel, and it's $240,000 with SAF, what do you want to do? I'll just go for the regular jet fuel, thanks. No matter if they've got billions in the bank or not, they will not pay the extra. I think business aviation in general needs to look more towards the offset side.
Yeah.
And that is certainly what I think Action will be focusing on in the future, is the offset side. I don't think SAF is going to work. But the basis of my question was, commercial airlines, are they paying 3-4 times like we are?
No, they have the volume. So this is the challenge, right?
Yeah.
They have the volume to negotiate lower rates and offtake agreements with SAF that's not yet here.
Right.
So they are investing in SAF production in order to achieve the best rates with
Yeah.
the volume that they can drive, right?
Yeah.
So that everything you've said, Mark, I cannot argue with you, but I don't have a crystal ball either. I absolutely agree with you that carbon credits are a much more viable solution, and that 19% could shift. But I do think we have to work on all of the levers in order to improve as the market grows. I don't want the market to slow down. Nobody does. And I think that our goal, I think if we are just at least always in action, that we can actually achieve something. Carbon credits could take 100%, but that wouldn't really help the aviation industry. And I think aviation in general is always, as I mentioned about innovation, there will be improvements, but hydrogen and electric are not coming tomorrow.
No.
And so the numbers, whether it's SAF 65 or SAF 30, I don't know, but I think SAF with investment and regulation like Refuel EU, it will go higher. It is already going higher. But we need investment. We need demand. I agree with you.
I think to get the mental switch with the principals is to push more for the offset.
Yeah, and if you
And
saw...
it should be the responsibility of the operator
Yeah.
to ensure that. It should be something that is, added in, a bit like personal protection insurance.
Exactly. So that's what I tried to show. Like the opt-in cost for a Global 6000 is $25 per hour. That's 5% SAF already built into that calculation as a booking claim SAF. I think that's really reasonable, and I think it can be done. The issue is this is all voluntary, and we know that. And what's driving, unfortunately, this activity is mandates. So we kind of have to hope for the best. CORSIA will drive a lot of offsetting, and it's coming next year. All operators internationally will start to offset. And you can see it now. We're getting a lot of demand, even from airlines. Just Azzera, a small company, is getting asked, do you have any CORSIA credits?
Brilliant.
So it's coming.
Thank you very much. Someone else has asked, do business jets need to be configured differently for SAF? No.
No. SAF is Jet A.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Puja. Thank you.
Thank you.